time that was, let's say, a bit dark.
That night, Hollywood was no longer a red carpet. It was a courtroom, and the gavel struck like the closing of a coffin for a legend. Each testimony burst forth like shards of glass, shattering against the screens of millions watching, like a final match. Cameras didn't blink, newspaper headlines raced faster than the truth, and a man once celebrated for his creative freedom was stripped bare before the public, inch by inch. Since when did privacy become a punishment? And who gave the world the right to judge such a man? Before becoming a name dissected in courtrooms, Johnny Depp was a dream that Hollywood both craved and feared. He wasn't like the molded, safe-cut stars. Depp entered the industry as an outsider. No standard muscles, no advertising smile, no ambition to be a hero in the traditional sense. What he brought was recklessness, a desire to disappear into the character, a spirit of freedom that Hollywood only dared to display on posters, rarely accepting in real life. During his peak years, Depp's name was synonymous with bizarre, unconventional, yet captivating roles. He turned difference into a brand, risk into art, and each appearance into a challenge. How far can cinema go if we dare to break the formula? Audiences adored him for that. Directors sought him out for that. And Hollywood, though unspoken, made billions of dollars from that very rebellious spirit. But behind the spotlight, a paradox began to emerge. As his career soared, Depp's personal life gradually descended into the shadows. Creative freedom comes with freedom to live. And in a system that constantly demands perfect imagery, that freedom soon became a problem. Hollywood loved him when he brought in box office success, but Hollywood also turned its back just as quickly when the story became less coherent. Then times changed. Social media turned everyone into a judge. News sped down to click speed. The complexity of human nature was compressed into 8-word headlines. When marital conflicts erupted, Depp's story was no longer a private matter. It became content. Every audio clip, every photograph, every testimony was cut out of context and thrown into the machine of dissemination, where emotion always triumphs over reason. This is the moment when the context of the tragedy is revealed. A star nurtured by attention, but destroyed by that very same light. There is no longer a boundary between private life and the stage. No more quiet moments for healing, only the heavy silence after each news report and the lingering question: when fame becomes a sentence, who has the patience to wait for the truth? This opening section is not intended to condemn or exonerate. It places us in the right place, in the midst of Hollywood, in the media, in the crowd, to understand why Johnny Depp's fall was not an isolated accident. It is the consequence of an era where people are reduced to images, and images can be torn apart in a single news cycle. Before the world knew Johnny Depp as a rebellious Hollywood icon, he was just a boy growing up in uncertainty. Depp's childhood wasn't built on security or stability. It was pieced together by constant moving, a feeling of belonging, and a home constantly under tension. For a child, that's not just a memory. It's the foundation of their worldview. Depp once said that he learned to escape very early, not from a specific place, but from feeling trapped. When his family fell apart, his world cracked. Music became his first escape, not for fame, but to disappear. The guitar gave him something real life couldn't, the power to control his own emotions. On small stages and in cramped rooms, Depp was no longer a helpless child. He was a storyteller. Leaving school early, Depp didn't carry any plan for success. He carried with him the recklessness of youth and the vague belief that art, whether music or acting, could save him from a mediocre life. When he arrived in Los Angeles, he didn't come to conquer Hollywood. He came to survive. The early years were a struggle, working odd jobs, playing in small bands, and watching his dream grow while his money dwindled. Acting came to Depp almost by chance, but precisely because he wasn't formally trained, he approached it instinctively. Instead of trying to become marketable, he chose to hide behind the character. This is the key point. For Depp, acting isn't about self-display. It's a way to avoid confronting himself. Each role is a mask, and each mask helps him conceal the broken pieces within. The loneliness of his childhood, the feeling of abandonment, and the lingering insecurity have inadvertently forged an extraordinary actor. Depp didn't seek validation by pleasing everyone. He sought it by being true to his own feelings, even if it made others uncomfortable. This foundation explains why, later in life, he was always drawn to outcast, eccentric, and socially marginalized characters, people who didn't belong to the normal world. But that same childhood sowed the seeds of future tragedy. When you grow up in chaos, you easily confuse passion with self-destruction. When you become accustomed to love, accompanied by pain, you may consider conflict normal. Emotional patterns formed early on don't disappear when you become famous. They are only amplified by money, power, and relentless attention. Therefore, when looking at the scandals and trials that followed, it's too simplistic to ask, who is right? Who is wrong? A more accurate question is, how will a child who grew up in instability cope with fame when the whole world is scrutinizing his every breath? Johnny Depp's childhood doesn't justify every choice he makes, but it explains why, when the spotlight is at its brightest, those old cracks are most visible. The biggest turning point in Johnny Depp's career didn't come from a carefully calculated strategy. It came from rejection. When Hollywood began to see him as a box office draw, Depp turned his back on that safe path. Instead of becoming a long-lasting teen idol, he deliberately broke away from his own image, a rare and risky decision in an industry that thrives on formulas. The role that marked this turning point was a character who barely spoke, lived in solitude, and used his hands as blades. The success of this role not only put Depp on the cinematic map, but also cemented a life-or-death choice. He wouldn't play to be liked. He would play to be believed, to be real. From that moment, Depp entered the orbit of outsiders, distorted souls, people who never fit into society. Throughout the following decade, every decision Depp made was like a gamble. He chose scripts that made studios nervous, characters that weren't easy to promote, and collaborators who were just as unconventional as himself. His roles became artistic statements. Cinema wasn't just for entertainment, but to unsettle, confuse, and make viewers think. For the mainstream audience, that was both appealing and dangerous. For Hollywood, it was a double-edged sword. Then that sword cut in the opposite direction. A drunken, staggering, eccentric pirate, a character many initially considered completely wrong, became a global icon. Surprisingly, that crazy role turned Depp into a box office superstar. Billions of dollars poured in. The rebellious icon was elevated to a commercial pillar. And the paradox emerged. The one who always evaded the system was now dependent on it. This immense success changed everything. When you become a crucial cog in a billion-dollar machine, the once celebrated distinctions begin to be scrutinized. Every action, every personal choice, every rumor becomes a financial risk. Depp no longer represents just his art. He represents contracts, brands, the thousands of jobs surrounding a single film. That pressure doesn't kill creativity immediately. It erodes it. The subsequent choices become increasingly difficult. Repeat the winning formula or continue to take risks and be seen as uncooperative. Depp tried both, and that's where the breaking point came. When you stand between art and commercial empire, every move can cause someone to turn their back. In the years that followed, the signs of cracks began to show. Lateness, behind-the-scenes conflicts, rumors about a lifestyle spiraling out of control. Things that were once overlooked when the money was flowing now became reasons for suspicion. The image of the eccentric genius is gradually replaced by the cold question, is he still trustworthy? This part of the story shows that tragedy doesn't stem from a single mistake. It comes from a series of right choices, in the wrong context. Depp succeeded because he dared to be different. But that very difference, when confined within a massive entertainment empire, became the spark for his later downfall, when everything was no longer under his control. At his peak, Johnny Depp seemed to have bent the rules of Hollywood. He was both an eccentric artistic icon and a multi-billion-dollar commercial powerhouse. Each of his screen appearances was a momentous event, not just because of the character, but because of the unspoken promise. Something extraordinary was about to happen. However, this very intersection of success and expectation began to create irreversible cracks. After explosive success, the pace quickened. A packed filming schedule, contracts piling up, constant travel blurred the lines between his role and his real self. When you're asked to become a living brand, privacy is no longer a right. It's a rare privilege. Bad habits that were once overlooked began to be scrutinized. Unstable workdays became rumors, and rumors in the age of clicks are always told as truth. His career at this point resembled a jagged graph. Alongside his successful projects were controversial films, inconsistent box office, and mixed reactions. To the public, it was a sign of declining performance. To the system, it was a risk. Hollywood doesn't hate you when you're struggling. Hollywood fears you when you're no longer predictable. And Depp, who had always disliked being predictable, began to be categorized as uncontrollable. Parallel to the professional pressure was a growing storm in his personal life. Broken relationships, personal disputes were brought to light, and finally, allegations of violence spread like wildfire. In just a few news cycles, the story was framed: the guilty party. Before the truth was verified, his image was judged. Film studios reacted the way they always do when money is at stake: cut ties, freeze contracts, withdraw his name. That moment marked a turning point. No longer a troubled star, Depp became a symbol of controversy. His name no longer evokes the character or the box office, but the title. Every subsequent decision is interpreted through a lens of suspicion. Silence is seen as admission. Speaking out is seen as defensive. In the court of public opinion, there are no safe choices. The trials, televisioned, edited, and commented on in real time, have turned private lives into a long-running series. Complex legal jargon is reduced to memes. Human emotions are reduced to interaction data. The most private details become subjects of public discussion. Regardless of the legal outcome, the damage has been done. Industry trust, the most fragile of all, has fallen to alarming levels. During this period, what is noteworthy is not just what Depp lost, but how he lost it. Not because of a failed film, not because of a wrong career decision, but because of a series of events where his private life was consumed as entertainment. Success once helped him overcome his mistakes. Now, success itself amplifies the fall. The more famous you become, the harder you fall, and the more onlookers there are. However, the story isn't entirely one-sided. Amidst the storm, there are moments of resistance, colleagues speaking out, smaller projects emerging, efforts to reclaim the right to tell their own story. But the road back is no longer a highway. It's a bumpy, winding path where every step is weighed. Reputation, once shattered, cannot be mended by a single verdict or a single role. The deepest tragedy lies in this. When the system chooses to protect itself, the individual becomes an acceptable cost. Years of dedication, cultural icons, collective memories, all can be set aside to avoid risk. And in that logic, the individual is reduced to a contractual clause. In retrospect, this success interspersed with tragedy is no accident. It's the consequence of a pattern, nurturing diversity for profit, then eliminating it when it becomes uncontrollable. Johnny Depp benefited from that pattern and was also its clearest victim. The question remains, not just for him, but for all of us. When the lights go out, who is responsible for the wreckage? When it comes to Johnny Depp, the public often remembers the character on screen before the person behind it. But it is his personal life, his most intimate relationships, that becomes the battleground where his reputation erodes most quickly. For Depp, love has never been a safe zone. It's a place where emotions run high, where old wounds are easily reopened, and where mistakes, even small ones, can be magnified into a verdict. In relationships, Depp is often portrayed as an intense lover, living by his emotions and lacking clear boundaries. This was once considered artistic. But when conflict arises, that same characteristic is interpreted as a loss of control. His already complex private life is now compressed into the framework of headlines, black or white, right or wrong, leaving no room for gray areas. The media doesn't just report, they fabricate. Disjointed audio clips, fragmented images, and one-sided narratives are arranged to tell a story that is easily digestible. And in that story, the characters must be clearly defined. Once public opinion has chosen the villain, every subsequent detail is used to reinforce that choice. Silence becomes evidence, tears become acting, and defenses, however reasonable, are dismissed as sophistry. The cruelest thing is the imbalance of power among the masses. In a private relationship, two people argue. But when millions join in the judgment, the scales are no longer based on sufficient evidence or context. They are based on collective emotion, which always fluctuates according to the latest headline. What should have taken time and privacy is forced to unfold before the cameras. Court proceedings bring marital life into the public space in unprecedented ways. Cold legal language clashes with the heated emotions of social media. The most private details, messages, diaries, arguments, are dissected frame by frame. No one leaves unscathed, but for celebrities, that trauma has immediate professional consequences. In that context, the question isn't just who's right, who's wrong. The bigger question is, when did we turn personal crises into entertainment? When emotional tragedy becomes the content, People are reduced to roles, and once the role is chosen, the ending seems predetermined. For Depp, the consequences weren't just a loss of reputation, it was a breakdown of trust in the media, in the public, and in the ability to be heard fairly. Subsequent relationships carry not only the emotional burden, but also the constant scrutiny. Every gesture can be interpreted. Every word can be taken in the worst possible way. This part of the story shows that fame doesn't just infiltrate careers, it infiltrates love as well. And when love is subjected to the scrutiny of the crowd, it rarely survives. Johnny Depp isn't the only one to experience this, but his case is the clearest example of the price to pay when the boundaries between private and public life are blurred. Today, Johnny Depp is no longer at the center of the storm as before. The spotlights have dimmed, the noise has subsided, but what remains is not a dazzling Hollywood comeback, but a silence. The silence of someone who has understood that fame can come like a flood and then recede to reveal mud and very real scars. Depp still creates art, but in a different way, less noisy, less compromising. He appears selectively, walking slowly, as if each step into the spotlight is a matter of weighing the price of attention, no longer striving to prove anything to the crowd. Only the need to retain the right to be human, to be wrong, to be silent, to recover. The most important thing now is not whether he won or lost in the eyes of the public, but the lesson the story leaves behind. In an era where every conflict can be live-streamed, where algorithms reward extreme emotions, the truth often comes late, if it comes at all. And when it came, the damage was done. Careers were frozen, relationships were broken, reputation was shattered. Johnny Depp's story forces us to ask, what are we consuming, news or tragedy? When a person becomes content, who is responsible for the consequences? The law can judge right and wrong, but the court of public opinion has no appeals process. Once an emotional verdict is delivered, it spreads faster than any evidence. The final message isn't about whitewashing or condemning. It reminds us of the boundaries, the boundary between responsibility and predatory behavior, between transparency and intrusion, between justice and entertainment. Fame isn't armor. It's a light, bright enough to be seen, but also harsh enough to burn if you stand there too long. If there's one thing left after all this, it's a warning. Don't confuse the right to know with the right to be executed. Hollywood can erect statues very quickly, but it can also pull the support cord silently. And when the lights go out, those left with the wreckage, not the system, but the people.